Good morning, I'm Nathan Hager.
And I'm Karen Moscow. Here are the stories we're following today.
We begin with the global economy and interest rates. The Federal Reserve makes a policy decision this afternoon, and while the central bank is not expected to make any move, there is much anticipation to the message Jay Powell will deliver. We get more from Bloomberg's Michael McKee.
Once again, it's a question of what they say rather than what they do. Markets have priced out any chance of a rate increase from the Fed. Instead, investors will focus on clues to what the central bank's plans are going forward. Will they keep their June forecast of at least one more rate hike before the end of 2023? And what will their revised economic forecast say about the chances of rate cuts in 2024? We'll also get officials' updated outlooks for employment, growth, and inflation. Expect Chairman Jay Powell to emphasize uncertainty in his post-decision news conference as the economy faces headwinds including rising oil prices, a government shutdown, and the auto workers' strike. Michael McKee, Bloomberg Radio.
All right, Mike, thanks. And stay with Bloomberg for full coverage, including the Bloomberg surveillance special, The Fed Decides, later this afternoon.
Well, Nathan, as we wait for that Fed decision, we got a surprise economic report that could impact tomorrow's Bank of England decision. And we go to London and get the latest with Bloomberg's Ewan Potts. Ewan, good morning.
Good morning, Karen and Nathan. Britain's inflation rate has unexpectedly dropped to the lowest level in 18 months. CPI in the year to August came in at 6.7%. Economists, not the first time they've been wrong, were expecting the reading to tick up to 7%. And good news on the UK's core inflation rate, which fell sharply from 6.9 to 6.2%. Investors have reined in bets for a further tightening from the Bank of England, though a quarter-point hike is still the consensus. We'll find out tomorrow. In London, I'm Ewan Potts, Bloomberg Daybreak.
All right, Ewan, thank you. Well, this morning, we're seeing more calls for oil to reach $100 a barrel. Goldman Sachs is raising its forecast for crude back to triple digits as demand booms and OPEC plus supply curbs tighten the market. With prices rising more than 30% since mid-June, Goldman pushed up its 12-month forecast for Brent to $100 from $93. And checking Brent right now, it's at $93.02 a barrel. That's down 1.4%. NYMEX crude's down 1.4% as well at $89.90.
Well, another call this morning, Nathan, this one on the equity markets. Bank of America's Savita Subramanian is boosting her target for the S&P 500 after this year's rally left many forecasts in the dust. The strategist now expects the benchmark to end the year at 4,600, about a 3.5% gain from current levels. Her previous S&P target was 4,300.
Sticking with markets, Karen, after starting trade yesterday, Instacart shares are down as much as 5% in the pre-market. The drop follows yesterday's volatile action for the online grocery delivery firm. The stock initially surged 43%, but ended the day with a gain of 12%. We get more from Bloomberg's Katie Roof.
It went better than what they were initially hoping several days ago, but definitely it's lower than the valuation they had in 2021, a lot lower than that, but around the $13 billion where they were valued last year.
And Bloomberg's Katie Roof says Instacart's listing combined with ARM's IPO is giving equity capital markets much-needed relief after the longest drought since 2009.
Now to the latest on the auto strike, which enters its sixth day, Nathan. The UAW says it will step up pressure by the end of the week if negotiations don't progress. Bloomberg's Ed Baxter has the story.
UAW President Shawn Fain has set a Friday noon deadline for good negotiations or an escalation in the strike.
If we don't make serious progress by noon on Friday, September 22nd, more locals will be called on to stand up and join the strike.
Representatives from GM, Ford, and Stellantis say bargaining has continued in good faith. Ed Baxter, Bloomberg Radio.
Thanks, Ed. We've got some labor resolution north of the border. Workers at Ford's Canada unit have avoided a strike. Unifor, the Canadian Auto Workers Unions, reached a 3-year national labor contract. In Canada, rather than negotiating with all three major automakers at once, Unifor selected Ford as the target for bargaining.
Well, Nathan, President Biden will be focused on improved labor conditions as the UN General Assembly continues. He'll meet with Brazil's President Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva and announce a partnership to help workers move into the gig economy and clean energy. The president will also be looking for Brazil's support for Ukraine in its war against Russia. That was the focus of his annual address to the gathering.
If we abandon the core principles of the United States to appease an aggressor, can any member state in this body feel confident that they are protected?
And Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelensky made his own appeal. He says Russia is turning everything from food to energy and children into weapons.
Those children in Russia are taught to hate Ukraine, and all ties with their families are broken. And this is clearly a genocide.
And even with these new calls for support, the U.S. and G7 allies now say they're preparing for the war to last for years to come.
Well, meanwhile, Karen, Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen's continuing her call for financial institutions to make voluntary net zero carbon commitments.
Our goal is to affirm the importance of credible net zero commitments and to encourage financial institutions that make them to take consistent approaches to implementation.
Secretary Yellen spoke at the Transition Finance Action Forum in New York, hosted by Bloomberg. And it's now time to take a look at some of the other stories making news in New York and around the world with Bloomberg's John Tucker. Good morning, John.
And Nathan, the operators of a Bronx daycare center now facing federal drug charges. It comes after one child died. 3 others were poisoned from exposure to fentanyl Friday. The federal prosecutors took over the case against Gray Mendez and Carlito Brito, who are allegedly operating a drug distribution business. Prosecutors say a kilogram brick of fentanyl was stored on top of children's playmats. That's enough fentanyl to kill 500,000 people. According to a draft securities filing, American Dream, that mega mall in New Jersey's Meadowlands, has seen its losses increase 4-fold in 1 year. More in this report from Bloomberg's Charlie Pellet.
The 3.5 million square foot shopping and entertainment complex, home to an indoor ski slope, amusement park, and water park, lost about $245 million in 2022 as expenses almost doubled to $428 million. This is according to a 3-page document posted to the Municipal Securities Rulemaking Board's EMMA website. In New York, Charlie Pellet, Bloomberg Radio.
New Yorkers' spending habits are cooling, and the New York State Comptroller Thomas DiNapoli is warning towns and cities to adjust their budgets. He also says paying to house migrants coming into New York is unsustainable.
The city is estimating some $12 billion in terms of the next couple of years of cost. The state financial plan has about $1.5 billion in it for migrants. The governor has indicated some more money will be put aside for that. But I don't see how the state or the city can get through this without additional federal support that so far has not been forthcoming.
DiNapoli was interviewed on Bloomberg Business Week. Prince William managed to go jogging in Central Park yesterday without paparazzi or anybody else noticing.
I decided to join the hordes of New Yorkers doing their morning routine as they went around Central Park. But it was wonderful waking up in New York on a sunny morning rather than the rain we had yesterday. And it was beautiful getting some fresh air this morning.
He went out for a run before announcing the 15 finalists for the 2023 Earthshot Prize, a competition he created 3 years ago to find the most innovative solutions to global environmental challenges. And health experts with the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention predicting what they call a repeat of a triple-demic this fall and winter with COVID-19, RSV, and influenza. The CDC urging people to get flu vaccinations and their COVID-19 booster before winter. Global news 24 hours a day, powered by more than 2,700 journalists and analysts in more than 120 countries. I'm John Tucker. This is Bloomberg. Nathan.
All right, John, thanks. Now get the latest news whenever you want it with Bloomberg News Now. The top stories from our global team of reporters at the click of a button. Get Bloomberg News Now on the Bloomberg Business app, Bloomberg.com, and anywhere you get your podcasts. Time now for the Bloomberg Sports Update. Here's John Stashower.
All right, Nathan, the Yankees are certainly hoping they don't finish this disappointing season with a sub-500 record. That hasn't happened since 1992. The record dropped to 76 and 75. A 7-1 loss to Toronto at the stadium. George Springer hit a leadoff home run for the 57th time in his career. Did it on his 34th birthday. Yankees will have a lot to say about whether the Blue Jays make it in as a wild card. Still have 5 games remaining with the Jays, who are in a battle. Very tight now with 3 AL West teams, Houston, Seattle, and Texas. Those 3 separated by only a half game, and the teams that don't win the division in it with the Jays for a wild card. Miami Marlins, one of 4 teams vying for 2 NL wild cards. The Marlins scored bottom of the 9th to beat the Mets 4-3. The Liberty moving on in the WNBA playoffs. They beat Washington 90-85 in overtime to win the series 2-0. Breanna Stewart knows the Liberty had not won a playoff series since 2015.
It means a lot. I think that, I don't know if we're thinking about getting this team back to somewhere where the Liberty hasn't been in 8 years, but, the first time that we've been able to do it as a group. And today there was highs and lows, and we knew it was going to be emotional.
On to the semifinals against either Connecticut or Minnesota. The word on Saquon Barkley was that he was going to be out 3 weeks with the injured ankle, but Coach Brian Daboll talking about him being out only 3 days. Daboll not ruling Barkley out for tomorrow's game at San Francisco, saying Barkley's a quick healer. Buddy Stevens has died at 66 from injuries suffered in a bicycle accident. Coach Dartmouth to 5 Ivy League titles. John Stanshauer, Bloomberg Sports.
From coast to coast, from New York to San Francisco, Boston to Washington, D.C., nationwide on SiriusXM, the Bloomberg Business app, and Bloomberg.com. This is Bloomberg Daybreak.
Good morning. I'm Nathan Hager. On decision day for the Federal Reserve, 2 p.m. Wall Street time is when Jay Powell and company will announce their plans for interest rates this month and send the signal to markets for where policy could be headed into November and beyond. So let's get you set for what's to come from the central bank. Bloomberg's Kriti Gupta is here with me now. And Kriti, this decision really could be a lot more about what's to come than any move the Fed makes today, because we're really not expecting a move, are we?
We're not expecting a move, and I believe, just to emphasize how much of a consensus take this is, 5.5% of economists estimated by Bloomberg think that the Fed is going to actually raise or move rates at all, which
That's
tells you...
That's kind of where the rate is, right?
Yeah,
5.5%.
Exactly. I know, the irony, right? So essentially, in other words, 94.5% of Bloomberg economists, or surveyed at least by Bloomberg, are saying that the Fed is not going to do anything. But Nathan, that's I think the crux of it here is that they're kind of setting this tone for the rest of the world, which is that we're going to have faith that the rest of the effect on the economy is going to slowly come. The idea here that these lags that I think a lot of people had maybe shrugged off early on because inflation wasn't decelerating as fast as perhaps people wanted it to, that is no longer the narrative at play. Now it's simply that we just wait for the lags to take effect. And I think that's one of the reasons that you're seeing the Federal Reserve kind of perhaps indicate, at least from this comments that we've gotten out of the FOMC members, that they're going to be taking a little bit more of a hands-off approach on this. But, Nathan, all of that could change based on what Jay Powell says around wages and around oil. Because, of course, we know that the strikes across the country and arguably across the world as well have captured a lot of attention, specifically with the United Auto Workers, where auto wages are significantly below manufacturing wages broadly. But at the same time, you're seeing much higher oil prices around the world, which is going to have real effects on the American consumer as we talk about gas prices, especially going into the election next year.
Yeah, and you have to wonder how much this surge in oil prices we've seen in recent days. Obviously, we're getting a bit of relief this morning on the session, but this idea that we could be getting to $100 a barrel in the not too distant future, what's that's going to mean for the lag effects that the Fed wants to see from policy?
Yeah, well, I'm old enough to remember when oil went negative, and I'm also old enough to remember when oil went to $143 a barrel. And let me tell you, those round numbers, 100, 120, even 90, make traders and people, by the way, everyday consumers, very, very nervous. To your point, Goldman Sachs actually came out this morning and said that their 12-month ahead price forecast was $100 a barrel. We're at about 93 right now, which tells you it's a pretty significant call that in about 12 months' time, in a year's time, when a lot of people are expecting inflation to come down much more significantly, prices are still going to be $100 a barrel. That's the price that people are saying. And that kind of speaks to the stickiness of the inflation that a lot of people are worried about. I think what's scary for me is that the inflation, what's driving it, is coming more from commodities, again, which is going to have real effects into how much your grocery bill costs, how much your gas bill costs, even heating and electricity.
You have to think the decision that's coming tomorrow from the Bank of England is going to get a lot more interesting now that we've seen this surprise drop in inflation. Who would have thought that we'd be considering the idea of a rate pause from the Bank of England?
I know. I mean, Andrew Bailey was supposed to be this kind of renegade, almost, essentially this kind of lone wolf in the sea of central bank doves. And he has turned out to kind of maybe lean towards what Chair Powell and President Lagarde are saying as well, which is simply that the Bank of England has gone very, very hard on inflation. What is the lag there? And do we now just wait for the lags to catch up with the broader economy while we sit on the sidelines and reassess? And that is something nobody really expected the Bank of England to say. What I will say, though, is that it's a little bit different because even though they might hike tomorrow, which I guess is the consensus call, but then that could be its last. They are, or at least there is a narrative that they will increase their quantitative tightening policy and essentially sell bonds on the open market, which could create some disruption there.
Just about a minute left, Critty. We're in day 6 of the United Auto Workers strike. Does this thing look like it's expanding?
It's not expanding yet, but it's not shrinking either. In fact, you are seeing a little bit of progress made to the north in Canada, where their union was able to make a negotiation with Ford. But again, they do say Canadians are nicer than Americans anyway, so maybe that has something to do with it.
Okay, we'll leave it there for now. Kriti Gupta, Bloomberg News, part of our coverage of the Fed Decides this afternoon, 2 p.m. Wall Street time, waiting for the decision from Chairman Powell and the Federal Open Market Committee. Powell will address the media, of course, at 2:30. Half hour after the decision. We will have full coverage for you on a special edition of Bloomberg Surveillance. The Fed Decides, beginning at 1:30 p.m. Wall Street time. Full coverage of decision day and all the central banks right here on Bloomberg Radio. Now we want to bring you to New York and the sidelines of the United Nations General Assembly, where we heard from the mayor of London, Sadiq Khan. He says UK Prime Minister Rishi Sunak is weak for pulling back on green policies rather than looking for opportunity in the climate crisis. Bloomberg's Francine Lacroix sat down with the mayor of London.
Well, what's happening is some people are trying to weaponize climate change, weaponize air pollution. And here's the perversity of what Prime Minister Sunak is doing. We've seen in the UK in September, in London in September, for the first time ever, 4 consecutive days of temperatures north of 30 degrees Celsius. We saw last year in London temperatures north of 40 degrees Celsius, wildfires in London. We've seen across Europe and the global north in America, wildfires, droughts, heat waves. The response of governments should be actually to turn this awful crisis into an opportunity, creating green jobs, a Green New Deal, thinking about how we can both save the planet, address climate change, but also give people security and have that just transition. And this is basically, lazy politics from a weak prime minister throwing red meat to his backbenchers because he's so weak and ineffectual.
But do you think you could have been better supported by Keir Starmer with you, Les? Well,
I recognise that we've got to make sure we take people with us. I recognise we've got to address people's concerns, but from Keir Starmer and the Labour Party, what I would hope to see, and we are seeing, is plans to address the climate emergency. You've got an announcement from the Shadow Finance Secretary, Rachel Reeves, saying, you know what, in the first term of a Labour government, we'll be investing to the tune of £28 billion a year, which is in proportionate terms akin to, if not more, than President Biden's Inflation Reduction Act.
But, Mayor, is it fair to say that you could have gotten more support by Keir Starmer on ULEZ and also in the by-elections, and you haven't because it's now a political hot potato?
Well, what happened was the by-election in Uxbridge and Ruislip took place a few weeks before the ULEZ was expanded. People had genuine concerns, which we were addressing. At the same time, people were playing on that as well. Listen, Keir and I are close friends. We've known each other for more than 25 years. The only thing we disagree about is I support a great soccer team, great football team, Liverpool. He supports a rubbish one, Arsenal.
Okay, but apart from football, what kind of advice would you give him to win the general election?
No, I don't give Keir advice. What I do is I'm a friend to Keir, but also an example of what a Labour politician winning and the difference we can make being pro-business, supporting businesses to flourish and thrive, being pro-enterprise, being pro-fighting climate emergency, being pro-clean air, building record numbers of affordable homes, making sure we invest in public transport and young people. And what I want people to see across the country is that's the difference Labour winning can make, compared and contrast to a Conservative government where there's been economic mismanagement. Liz Truss's awful mini budget last year, but also a weak and ineffectual Conservative leader.
What can Labour now do to be closer to businesses? There has been a campaign to actually get them on board. I think the latest polls show that they'd be pretty happy with the Labour government. What would you do more?
Well, there's two things that people want to see from good leaders. One is addressing social injustices, but also economic competence, supporting businesses, being proud to support businesses, being pro-business. One of the things that we've got to have the humility as politicians to accept is, we don't create the jobs, the wealth, the prosperity. Very often we think we do, but we don't. We can create the environment where businesses flourish and thrive, and work with businesses to be well-paid jobs, to work with businesses to make sure they invest in young people, to work with businesses to train up people to have the skills for the jobs being created. My nervousness about the Labour Party is our reputation in the recent past has been we're anti-growth, we're anti-prosperity. What Keir Starmer, Rachel Reeves, their teams have done is to reassure businesses by listening to them that we are pro-business. We're back at business as a result.
Mayor, should London have gotten the ARM IPO, and was it a kick in the teeth not to have done so?
I'm sorry to hear you.
The ARM IPO.
Well, listen, the great thing about London is our underlying strengths are still there. We even post-Brexit, we are still a city that has got all the things that businesses need to invest in London, to expand in London, and to run in London.
This is Bloomberg Daybreak Today, your morning brief on the stories making news from Wall Street to Washington and beyond.
Look for us on your podcast feed at 6 a.m. Eastern each morning on Apple, Spotify, and anywhere else you get your podcasts.
You can also listen live each morning starting at 5 a.m. Wall Street time on Bloomberg 1130 in New York, Bloomberg 99.1 in Washington, Bloomberg 106.1 in Boston, and Bloomberg 960 in San Francisco.
Our flagship New York station is also available on your Amazon Alexa devices. Just say, Alexa, play Bloomberg 1130.
Plus, listen coast to coast on the Bloomberg Business app, Sirius XM Channel 119, the iHeartRadio app, and on Bloomberg.com. I'm Nathan Hager.
And I'm Karen Moscow. Join us again tomorrow morning for all the news you need to start your day right here on Bloomberg Daybreak.